not always does the best win. And if you still believe life rewards the kindest, the most honest, the most disciplined, you're living in a lie. Not your lie. The systems. You were taught that virtue leads to victory, but it rarely does. Because this world doesn't run on fairness. It runs on power. You thought goodness would be enough, but it put you in a golden cage, obedient, quiet, waiting, while others less moral, more strategic, made their moves. You were taught to be good, but never taught to be strong. You were told ambition is arrogance, that wanting more is wrong. So you waited. You hoped. But the world does not respond to hope. It responds to action, because a golden leash is still a leash. And obedience without power is just sedation. So, if success isn't about being good, then what is it about for Nietzsche? It started by redefining weakness itself. Nietzsche wasn't talking about muscles when he spoke of weakness. He was talking about the mind, the spirit, the invisible posture of a human being who has stopped pushing forward. Not the weakness that comes from exhaustion or physical pain, but the more insidious kind, the kind that wears a smile, plays it safe, and always waits for permission. To Nietzsche, weakness wasn't just a moment of hesitation. It was a mindset, a silent, persiste surrender, the refusal to face reality, the refusal to take responsibility, the refusal to evolve. It's comfort that calcifies. It's routine without challenge. It's the way people adopt borrowed beliefs just to avoid standing out wearing masks to fit in rather than confronting their own truth. This isn't just a personal flaw. It's a collective way of being, a quête épidémique, and it hides in plain sight, disguised as maturity, politeness, or humility. But Nietzsche had no interest in polite illusions. He saw weakness for what it really was, a submission to mediocrity, a voluntary forfeiture of the will. Today, psychology has a name for it: learned helplessness, a state where someone no longer tries, not because they're incapable, but because they've been conditioned to believe that nothing they do will matter. So they stop risking. They stop challenging themselves. They shrink, choosing the predictable path over the meaningful one, choosing safety over purpose, even when it quietly erodes their soul. But Nietzsche didn't stop there. He saw weakness not merely as avoidance, but as addiction, an addiction to being liked, to being approved of, to blending in, to never making others uncomfortable. And so weakness flatters instead of confronts. It avoids conflict. It praises conformity and labels it virtue. It calls hesitation compassion. It calls fear kindness. And worst of all, it teaches you to feel proud of it. Nietzsche didn't hate people. He hated what people had been programmed to become. Tamed, dulled, defanged. He saw a world full of humans trapped in what he called a soft prison, not one made of bars or chains, but one made of pillows. Comfortable, quiet, and deadly. Because in that kind of prison, No one screams. No one rebels. They just sit, compliant, smiling, dying slowly. And the tragedy, it isn't even their fault. This isn't just about individual failure. It's about a culture-wide hypnosis, a system that teaches you to demonize your strength, to feel guilty for wanting more, to associate power with corruption, and ambition with selfishness. It tells you to sit down, to wait, to serve. It rewards obedience. It punishes initiative. It keeps you numb with praise for your good behavior, while stripping you of the fire that made you alive in the first place. Why does this system exist? Because the world is easier to manage when people stay small. Because weak people don't rebel. They don't challenge authority. They don't build something new. They follow. And followers don't threaten the status quo. To Nietzsche, this wasn't just unfortunate, it was strategic. He saw weakness, not as a glitch in the system, but as the system itself, a morality crafted by the powerless to make their suffering feel righteous. A code of values not meant to liberate, but to sedate. It tells you that survival is noble, that passivity is peace, that shrinking is compassion. But Nietzsche rejected all of that, because survival is not the same as living. Comfort is not the same as meaning. And being good is not the same as being great. You weren't made to sleepwalk through life. You were made to become, to sharpen, to stretch into something more. But becoming does not happen in comfort. A lion raised in a living room doesn't become good. It becomes hollow, docile, deactivated. Nietzsche believed your will was sacred, the inner spark. But he also believed it could be stolen not by force, but by seduction, through ease, through false virtue, through the applause of others who benefit from your silence. Because when a culture praises politeness over truth, compliance over courage, you don't just lose your voice, you lose yourself. To Nietzsche, weakness wasn't just a personal problem. It was a system of moral anesthesia, a tranquilizer injected into the masses, a system designed not to elevate, but to neutralize. And that system had a name: slave morality. Nietzsche believed that one of the most dangerous lies ever told was this: that weakness is virtue. He called it slave morality, a system not born from wisdom or strength, but from resentment, from powerlessness that learned to moralize itself. Picture someone who feels small, voiceless, invisible. They look at those with power, discipline, or clarity, and instead of asking, "How do I grow stronger?" they ask, "How can I make strength look evil?" That question becomes a weapon. And eventually, it becomes a moral code. This is what Nietzsche called ressentiment, a quiet bitterness that rewrites values out of revenge, not virtue. In slave morality, the rules flip. Humility is no longer a choice. It's a defense mechanism. Obedience becomes moral. Suffering becomes sacred. And anyone who dares to rise is labeled selfish, dangerous, arrogant. Strength becomes suspicious. Success becomes corrupt, and conformity becomes goodness. But Nietzsche saw the cost. This morality didn't elevate the human soul. It dulled it. It sanctified mediocrity because mediocrity was safe, familiar, controllable. And today, we see the same inversion, only now. It's digital. We don't burn heretics anymore. We cancel them. We don't crucify outsiders. We shame them publicly, virally, endlessly. Virtue signaling has become the modern mask of slave morality. It rewards visibility, not virtue. Emotion, not depth. Performance, not principle. Outrage becomes currency, and victimhood becomes social capital. We've created a culture where moral outrage is monetized, where the most fragile opinions shout the loudest and the strongest voices are told to sit down. This is status envy, wrapped in ethics. It's not about justice. It's about control. Control of attention, of narrative, of who gets to speak. And this is what Nietzsche feared most. Not the collapse of morality, but the weaponization of it. He warned that a society driven by resentment would teach people to shrink instead of grow, to obey instead of think, to resent power instead of develop their own. In this culture, rising becomes a threat, and so we are taught subtly, constantly, to self-limit, to dim our light, to question our ambition, to apologize for our drive. Because when you grow, you challenge those who stayed behind, and comfort hates contrast. But Nietzsche didn't just critique this inversion. He offered a path forward, not by preaching morality, but by awakening power. He knew that beneath the guilt, beneath the self-censorship, beneath the fear of being too much, there is still a will, a force, buried, but intact. He called it the will to power, the inner flame not to dominate others, but to transform the self. A rebellion not against society, but against the smallness we've been trained to accept. To Nietzsche, resentment wasn't just a feeling. It was a cultural system, a morality designed to keep you docile, ashamed, and obedient. But there was an antidote, a forgotten drive deeper than morality. He called it the will to power, and it changes everything. Among Nietzsche's most misunderstood ideas is this one, the will to power. To many, it sounds like conquest, domination, control. But Nietzsche never meant power over others. He meant something much more radical: power over the self. The will to power is not about hierarchy. It's not about ego or ambition for applause. It's the inner force to become, to evolve, to transcend, to outgrow the old version of yourself. It's what drives you to rebuild after you've been broken, to step into uncertainty with nothing but grit, to enter the storm, not to survive, but to reshape yourself inside it. Nietzsche saw life not as a linear path, but as a forge, a place where chaos and challenge reveal your deepest potential. That's where the will to power lives. Not in comfort, not in applause, but in transformation, This force says, don't run from pain, use it. Don't fear the unknown, step into it. Don't seek approval, build integrity. Psychologists today call this state flow, a term coined by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is the sweet spot where challenge meets capacity, where you're fully immersed in a task, not because it's easy, but because it stretches every fiber of your being. In flow, the ego fades. Time disappears. There is only presence and power. Nietzsche would say, that's what becoming feels like. That's the will to power in motion. Because real power doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It shows up again and again when no one's watching. When everything inside you says quit, and you move anyway. Strength, in this context, is not dominance. It's alignment. Alignment between who you are and who you are still becoming. And what fuels this evolution? Discomfort. Yes, discomfort is not the enemy. It is the catalyst. It strips away illusions. It sharpens your awareness. It teaches you to let go of what no longer serves your highest direction. Look back at your proudest moments. They didn't come from safety. They came from risk, from friction, from struggle, from doing what scared you before it became natural. That's the will to power in action. It's not flashy. It's not performative. It's deeply internal. And Nietzsche believed most people never tap into it, not because they can't, but because they've been conditioned not to try. We're taught to avoid struggle, to chase stability, to make life predictable. But the will to power says, you were not made to coast. You were made to climb. And that climb, the ascent toward a more capable, more courageous version of yourself, isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong orientation. It's how you approach challenge, pain, failure, and rebirth. It's how you break cycles of self-doubt by acting in spite of them. If the will to power is the engine of transformation, then what is its destination? What kind of human are we meant to become when we stop fearing power and start embodying it? Nietzsche had a name for that person, not a hero, not a saint, but something far more rare. He called it the Übermensch. To Nietzsche, the highest expression of human potential was not the genius, not the saint, not the rule follower. It was the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates values instead of inheriting them, the one who rises above the herd, not out of arrogance, but necessity. Most people live by borrowed scripts. They inherit beliefs, morality, purpose, never questioning where it all came from. The Übermensch does the opposite. He rewrites the script. This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's existential authorship. It's taking responsibility for your life at the level of meaning, while the masses consume meaning through media, through identity, through groupthink. The Übermensch creates it. He does not outsource his values. He builds them from direct experience. In today's language, this is what we would call the existential creator. Not just someone who makes things, but someone who lives as a creation. someone who sees life as a raw material and shapes it through conviction. This kind of person is rare. Not because the potential is rare, but because the cost is high. We live in a culture designed for compliance. Algorithms reward sameness. Schools reward obedience. Social systems reward predictability. The Übermensch disrupts all of that. Not by tearing it down, but by outgrowing it. By becoming something so self-defined, so coherent, that the system can't categorize him. He is a walking contradiction to the world's expectations. He is the man or woman who dares to speak when silence is safer, who chooses integrity over belonging, who would rather be real than be liked. And because of that, he is often misunderstood, rejected, vilified, because his very presence exposes the mediocrity others have normalized. But Nietzsche never promised that the Übermensch would be comfortable. He promised he would be free. And freedom, real freedom, comes at a cost. It requires standing apart. It requires walking alone. It requires making peace with discomfort. Because no one applauds you when you stop performing. They fear you. Because you are no longer predictable. And here is the metaphor. Nietzsche would have loved. Be the lightning, not the weatherman. The weatherman watches, reacts, predicts. The lightning does not wait. It strikes. It makes impact before it explains itself. The Übermensch is not waiting for approval. He is not forecasting outcomes. He is embodying his truth, whether the world is ready or not. And this is why the Übermensch is so rare. Because most people want to rise, but they also want to be loved for it. The Übermensch understands you don't get both. You either belong to the crowd or you rise beyond it. You either become what is expected or you become what is essential. But rising above the herd comes with a cost. Because in a world built on comfort, real strength is punished. And Nietzsche knew those who dare to shine must first learn how to stand inside the fire. Strength is not always celebrated. In fact, real strength often unsettles the world around it. Why? Because strength doesn't conform. It doesn't apologize for its presence. It doesn't dilute itself to avoid making others uncomfortable. And that makes people uneasy. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your courage reflects their avoidance. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your fire reminds them of their ashes. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He knew that real strength, the kind that challenges norms, breaks patterns, and lives unapologetically, isn't embraced. It's rejected. Not because it's wrong, but because it's disruptive. In a society built on compromise and politeness, authenticity looks dangerous. Power looks arrogant. Conviction looks extreme. So the world pushes back. And you start to notice something strange. The more you grow, the more resistance you meet. The stronger you become, the more people try to shrink you. It's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Because systems don't like outliers. They're built to sustain the status quo, not to elevate those who transcend it. Look around you. Most of the people who make real change are not loved in their time. They are misunderstood, silenced, erased. Whistleblowers, innovators, truth-tellers, they often lose more than they gain. Not because they lack value, but because they carry too much of it. Because their presence alone challenges the inertia around them. Because their truth does not ask for permission. But this rejection, this friction, isn't something to fear. It's something to understand. Rejection is not a punishment. It's a signal. It means you're stepping out of alignment with the narratives that keep most people small. It means you're beginning to matter. True strength isn't about domination or applause. It's about endurance, about holding your ground when the world would rather you disappear. It's the ability to stay rooted in what you believe, even when that belief costs you comfort, connection, or convenience. Because here's the paradox. If you're not being misunderstood, you're probably not saying anything real. If no one's offended, you're probably not challenging anything deep. If no one pushes back, you might still be playing small. And so, Nietzsche's lesson echoes through time. The strong are not crowned. They are crucified, then copied, then celebrated, only after they're gone. And yet, they walk anyway, because they're not in it for approval. They're in it for truth, for alignment, for becoming. And if you're listening to this, you might already feel that tension. You've begun to sense that pleasing everyone is the fastest way to betray yourself. You've started to recognize that fitting in has a cost, and that cost is your soul. So what do? You learn to walk through rejection without losing your fire. You learn to let misunderstanding sharpen you, not shatter you. And most of all, you stop apologizing for being real. Because strength doesn't ask to be understood. It stands. It moves. It builds. And yes, it gets rejected. But rejection is not your downfall. It is the ritual that initiates your real becoming. But if you want to walk this path, you'll need to confront an addiction. Most people never admit they have the need for approval. And that is where the real battle begins. Validation is a drug. It soothes you. It flatters you. And then quietly, it enslaves you. Because every time you depend on someone else's approval, you surrender a piece of yourself. Not visibly, not all at once, but piece by piece, smile by smile, like by like. You shape your voice, not for truth, but for applause. You shrink your edges not for clarity, but for acceptance. And in the beginning, it feels harmless. Just a little conformity. Just a small edit to your authenticity. Just enough to be liked. But over time, it becomes who you are. Or more accurately, who you're pretending to be. Modern neuroscience confirms this. When we receive social approval, the brain lights up with dopamine, the same chemical triggered by addictive substances. External validation, quite literally, rewires the brain. And like any high, you start needing more of it to feel the same. But here's the danger. The more you chase validation, the more distant you grow from your own center. you become performative, reactive, externally calibrated. And in that state, you are no longer living from power. You are living from permission. Nietzsche saw this as a spiritual sickness, the loss of self through the pursuit of applause. He believed the truly powerful individual does not wait to be seen. They see themselves, and more importantly, they trust what they see. This isn't arrogance. It's alignment. It's the ability to stand firmly in your convictions, even when they don't echo back to you. Because when your power comes from within, you are immune to both criticism and flattery. You're not shaken by the crowd's opinion because you're not performing for them. You've moved beyond the stage. But let's be honest, walking this path is not easy. There's a reason most people never reach inner sovereignty. It's not because they lack intelligence or talent. It's because they never confront their addiction to being liked. They can't handle disapproval. They can't endure the silence that follows authenticity. So they perform. They align themselves, not with truth, but with expectation. And slowly, they vanish. They become echoes of the culture, not creators of their own path. But here's the turning point. You can stop. You can step off the stage. You can stop living to be seen and start living to be real. Ask yourself, what would you do differently if no one was watching? What would you build if likes didn't exist? What would you say if you knew no one would applaud? That is your real self trying to speak. And that voice, quiet, steady, unfiltered, is the source of true power. Because in a world obsessed with projection, authenticity is rebellion. And not just rebellion for rebellion's sake, but a sacred act of realignment. The powerful don't need validation to move. They move because it is true, because it is right, because it is theirs. And when you live that way, the irony is this: you earn the respect you no longer need. You attract the attention you're no longer chasing. You build a presence that doesn't beg it, commands. Not by force, but by resonance. And that's where Nietzsche's most dangerous idea arises, because to truly become powerful, you must confront the part of yourself you've buried the longest. The one the world told you to repress. Your shadow. Everyone talks about awakening, but no one talks about the price. Because the moment you truly wake up, you meet someone you've spent your whole life avoiding your shadow. Not the villain, not the monster, but the parts of yourself you've suppressed, ignored, or disowned. The ambition you were told was arrogant, the rage you were taught to bury, the hunger you were shamed for having. Carl Jung called this confrontation shadow integration. It is not the act of erasing darkness, but owning it, facing it, learning to use it. Because your shadow contains power, and if you do not learn to hold it, it will control you from the dark. See, what you repress doesn't disappear. It festers. Repressed rage becomes passive aggression. Repressed desire turns into resentment. Repressed confidence becomes constant self-doubt. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unused fuel. Nietzsche understood this long before Jung. He didn't ask us to destroy the parts of ourselves society rejected. He asked us to forge them, to melt them down and recast them into something sharper, cleaner, stronger. Because every part of you, yes, even the parts you fear, has a role to play in your becoming, but only if you stop hiding them. Here is the paradox. The more authentic you become, the more disruptive you will seem. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're finally doing something real. And nothing unsettles the world more than a person who no longer pretends. When you bring your shadow into the light, you stop being agreeable. You stop shrinking to fit. You stop apologizing for your presence. And people won't like it. They'll call you selfish, too intense, too focused, too direct. But what they really mean is, you stopped being controllable. Because to awaken is not to float into bliss. It's to enter a war with the self you outgrew. It's to betray the version of you that was built for safety and trade it for one built for sovereignty. And yes, it feels like betrayal, because you're killing off something that once protected you. But protection becomes prison when it outlives its purpose. So, here's the cost. You must sacrifice your former identity, the one that was palatable, the one that never spoke too loudly, the one that waited, nodded, stayed small. You don't evolve by upgrading that version. You evolve by letting it die. Because true awakening is not just insight, it's combustion. It's the fire that burns away illusion. And it hurts. But on the other side of that pain is something unshakable, a self that no longer fragments to please, a will that no longer flinches in the face of rejection, a clarity that cuts through noise like a blade. And the shadow, once feared, becomes your edge, not to harm, but to carve out your path. But even after the fire clears, most retreat, not because they're weak, but because they won't pay the final price. Why? Because they refuse the next step, the one that requires the greatest act of self-loyalty, the betrayal that transformation demands. Growth sounds noble until you realize what it asks you to leave behind. Because every leap forward demands a small death. Not of your body, but of your identity. To evolve, you must betray who you were. Not because that version was wrong, but because it's no longer enough. And this is where most people stop. Not because they lack ambition, but because they confuse loyalty with stagnation. They think staying true to outdated beliefs is integrity. But, in truth, it's quiet sabotage. You weren't meant to stay the same. You were meant to transform. And transformation is not polite. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for applause. It demands that you shed layers, even the ones that once saved you. Because what protected you as a child can imprison you as an adult. The fear of conflict, the need for approval, the habit of silence, all of them once helped you survive. But now, they keep you from becoming. So, ask yourself, are you loyal to your growth or to your comfort? Are you defending who you could be or who you used to be? This is the fracture point, where your future self stands just beyond reach. And the only way to get there is to let go of the identity clinging to safety. The identity that doesn't take risks. That plays small to keep the peace. That would rather be accepted than awakened. But real transformation begins when you realize that version of you can't come with you. You have to disappoint people. You have to become too much. You have to outgrow the script others handed you. And yes, it will feel like betrayal. Because it is. But it's not betrayal of your values. It's betrayal of your limitations. You're not abandoning yourself. You're finally choosing your potential over your programming. This is sacred. This is necessary. Because the cost of clinging to an expired version of yourself is your aliveness. You might keep your circle happy. You might keep your image intact. But you'll lose the fire, the pulse, the hunger that makes life worth living. The world will tell you to compromise, to find balance, to be realistic. But your potential is not realistic. It is demanding. It is vast. And it requires your full participation. This is why Nietzsche said, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. He wasn't romanticizing chaos. He was revealing a truth. You cannot create something powerful while staying perfectly put together. You must be willing to break, to disrupt your own order, to burn the safe version of yourself so the true version can rise. Because every new self comes at the cost of an old one. And yes, the pain of that departure is real. But the regret of never evolving is worse. And when you begin that transformation, the world will push back. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're finally doing something rare. Which is why you must stop negotiating with your potential. You either rise or retreat. No one is coming to save you. Not your mentors. Not your family. Not the system that taught you obedience. You can wait a lifetime for recognition, for permission, for that green light to finally begin. But here's the truth. It's never coming. The moment you understand this deeply, viscerally, you stop waiting, and you start becoming. Because power isn't something you're given. It's something you claim, not through aggression, but through radical responsibility. Success isn't found out there. It's not a finish line you stumble across. It's the mirror of what you sustain inside your habits, your focus, your inner architecture. It reflects how you carry yourself when no one's watching, how you move when no one is applauding, how you respond when the world tries to make you small again. And if you want that reflection to change, you have to change what's standing in front of the mirror. You must become someone who no longer needs permission. Not to speak, not to build, not to take up space. Because the person who moves without asking is the person who rewrites the rules. That doesn't mean becoming reckless. It means becoming sovereign, clear in who you are, unshakable in what you stand for. You've been conditioned to ask, is this okay? Will they approve? Do I deserve this? But power does not ask. Power acts. It acts with purpose, with precision, with the quiet knowing that even if the world resists, You are no longer negotiable. This is what Nietzsche understood, that the path to greatness isn't granted by society. It's carved out by those who dare to stop apologizing for their strength. And yes, it's going to cost you. You'll lose people who were only there to control your light. You'll outgrow groups that needed you small to feel secure. You'll be labeled arrogant, intense, even dangerous. Let them talk. Because if your presence doesn't shake the comfortable, you're probably still asleep. The real question isn't success. It's sovereignty. Will you own your becoming or outsource it forever? The real question is, are you willing to be feared before you're admired? Are you willing to be misunderstood before you're respected? Are you willing to become everything you are without asking for applause? That's the final test. And it doesn't come with guarantees. It comes with fire. But if you've made it this far, something in you has already shifted. The old shell is cracking. The old story no longer fits. And now it's time to decide. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. If something in you awakened while listening, prove it. Scroll down and comment one sentence, "I no longer ask for permission." Let that be your first act of defiance. Your first public declaration that the game has changed, that you're done waiting, done shrinking, done living on borrowed beliefs. Because this isn't motivation, this is metamorphosis. You were never meant to follow. You were meant to ignite. And if this hurt good, that means you're finally waking up.